Working on part 2 today. We have the part 0 through 2 homework due tonight. And technically, this one is due Friday, but it doesn't actually cover part 3. So if you want, you could probably knock that one out as well. I'll go over that in a second. So, what were we up to last time? Let's start there. So last time in part 1, we were talking about these 4 events, and we were trying to see if these people down here made what we defined as consistent predictions or consistent probabilities. In other words, do their predictions make sense? You know, if one event is more likely, then it should have the higher probability. So what we did last time is we wrote down these 2 rules that I'll remind you of real quick. The first one I referred to as the subset rule, which essentially said if we have any 2 events, and it doesn't matter what they are, I'll call them A and B, and every time event A occurs, we also have that event B occurs, then the probability of event A is less than or equal to the probability of event B. And that actually happens at least twice here. For example, every time it snows 3 inches or more, then it's also snowed 1 inch or more, but not necessarily vice versa. So we have that the probability of question 2 is less than or equal to the probability of question 1. Likewise, every time it snows 5 inches or more, it's also snowed 3 inches or more, but not necessarily the other way around. So we have that the probability of question 3 is less than or equal to the probability of question 2. And then our second rule was that if you have like a group of events, only 2 in this case, but it could be 2 or more, where one of them can only occur at the same time, and it's guaranteed that one of them will always occur, the sum of those probabilities have to be 100%. So if we look at these 2 events, where it either snows an inch or more, or it'll snow less than an inch or not at all, one of those 2 things has to happen. It's guaranteed. And therefore, those probabilities have to add to 100%. So this is just my notes. You don't have to write that down if you want. What we're more interested in is these computations. So last time what I mentioned is you can build these new columns exactly the same way we built these columns in module 8 when we were checking if certain projects met their goal. We can build a series of if statements that, you know, compare the appropriate 2 cells over here, and if they're consistent, we put a 1. If they're not, we put a 0. And so these 3 things in down here, these 3 rules, will be our 3 logical tests that we're programming inside of our if statements. And then last of all, there was a question that said essentially, how many people did all of these things correct? And so I added one more column that essentially is checking for people like this who did all 3 of those things consistent. And there's lots of ways you can do this. You could check if they summed to 3. You could actually sum them and then just count all the 3s. There's several ways to approach it. But only 5 people did all 3 of these things correct. That should be what you get. So that was part 1. And what we're doing today in part 2 is almost identical. The main difference is we're moving over to this responses tab, and now we're looking at these 10 predictions for these 851 people. So first difference is it's more data. The second difference is that we're not actually comparing all 10 of these things. That would be a lot of pairs to match up. We're only comparing the first 5 because they're the only 5 that are related to one another. So if I go over to the occurrence tab, there's descriptions of these 10 events, and the first 5 are all about whether or not Amazon stock will go up or down. And so, for instance, like if you say there's a 90% chance that it goes up, you can't also say there's an 80% chance that it goes down. There would be an inconsistency there. So we need to compute consistency results for these first five. Now, these last five are completely unrelated. So I'm not really even going to talk about those, but that's where they came from if you're interested. So what I like to do is actually rewrite these descriptions because I find these to be a little bit confusing sometimes in the following way. These are the five events that you essentially want to repeat what you did for part one, just on this new tab. And the first two events are that the stock price decreased by either 5% or more or 1% or more. The next two are that it increased by either 5% or more or 1% or more. And then the last one was that it changed by somewhere in between -5 and +5%. And so there's definitely some relationships there that satisfy our two rules where, you know, like if I compare these two, if one of those things happens, the other one also always happens. And so maybe there's a subset relation there. And there's also a relationship between a group of these where if you group them in the correct way, one of them is guaranteed to happen. So we have that 100% rule. And so just like last time, maybe add some columns over here where you can compute whether or not they did those things correct. Now, in the workbook, it's extremely quick, gives you a description, and really there's one computation, and then the rest is like checking if you identified the consistency stuff correct. So it's a really quick day, at least compared to a lot of our other days. And because of that, I wanted to mention that it might not be a bad idea to actually try both of these homeworks if you have that extra time today. If you don't have extra time, then it's not a big deal. And the reason why is if we look at these, here's the first one. Well, this is a part 0 question. This is a part 0 question. We already know how to do that. There's a single part 2 question on here. And sometimes people read this a little and get a little confused in what it's asking. They are not asking you to compute anything. What they're asking you to do is say, look at these two options. Only one of them is consistent. So through the process of elimination, you'll say, oh, well, this number is supposed to be bigger than this number. And so I can eliminate that one. And so this one has to be correct. That's the idea there. You're not computing anything. It's just testing if you understand those consistency rules. So that's the first homework. Pretty quick, 3 questions. Next question, the next homework starts, same question that the other one ended on. And then these other two are asking you to essentially, build those columns and count how many people did those things correct. So if you have those columns, it's not too bad. I don't know why it's called parts 1 through 3. It is only asking about part 2 information. So if you have the extra time, you could probably knock out both these homeworks.